We have recently been shown that unit capabilities, their behaviors, and customizations are all massively evolving for the upcoming Total War Warhammer 40,000. It's all very exciting stuff, so we're going to go through every new feature demonstrated from the hour-long live stream we got from CA just over a week ago, and I'll provide some thoughts, some speculations, hopefully stimulate further discussion down below in the comments, and we'll finish off with my overall impressions of everything we've seen so far for Total War 40k. Wow, how exciting. Starting off with reserves. So reserves are kind of like reinforcements from previous titles, which are available from nearby armies on the campaign map, as well as whatever orbital forces you may have up in space. You can decide how many units you wish to keep in the reserve pool or bring into the battle during deployment, and the faction you're playing determines the capabilities of how your reinforcements from the reserve pool enter the battle. So for instance, with the Imperial Guard that we're seeing on screen now, their reserve units could come in off the edge of the map like every other Total War before this one, slowly and consistently reinforcing the front line, or they mentioned their units could be dropped off via Valkyries. How exactly vehicle-based reinforcement from the reserve pool functions remains to be seen. Is the transport vulnerable to enemy fire during mid-battle deployment? Can I control exactly where the Valkyrie comes in from? Could I paint the route I wanted to take if it comes from the edge of the map, or would it come down from the sky? What about giving it waypoints so I can optimize where and how I want the reinforcements to arrive? Yes, I know, all good questions, and I cannot wait till we see more of this feature in action, and I hope Creative Assembly gets really creative with it. It's in their name after all. Faction diversity comes into play with the reserve feature, so compare how we've spoken about the Imperial Guard reinforcing to, say, the Space Marines, who will get access to orbital drop pods, and you can easily understand how it would make a lot more sense to keep a few squads in reserve that you can drop from the sky and damage, disrupt, and destroy enemy formations while bringing new units into the field. How the other factions will work also remains to be seen. Eldari will probably be using webway-enabled teleportation, and Chaos could probably have crazy warp portals. It's 40k, the possibilities are endless, but I think this whole reserve concept is pretty awesome, and could even add more tactical options and depth to timed assaults to overwhelm the enemy and attempt to outflank and chain break morale, similar to how summoned units have been used throughout Total War Warhammer 3. Next up, we see some map-wide campaign-based abilities just above the minimap. This isn't new, and it's very reminiscent of Total War Warhammer 3, but I'm putting it in this video anyway, so you. We're given two sets of abilities, the top being from Bombardments, which range from a Death Strike Godspear Warhead, which is like a delete button for units, an Orbital Lance Strike, which operates like a Vortex spell from Warhammer 3. It even says Vortex on the tooltip, but you'll be able to manually control and paint the battlefield with it, which is pretty sick. And then we have a Valkyrie Rocket Pod Barrage, all big explosive damage abilities with slightly different timings, damage values, and use cases. Nothing too insane. The bottom row of abilities are regimental orders, similar to army abilities from previous games. Here, however, the way it works is command units and sergeants that can be attached to units during customization can have Vox casters, basically 40k radio, which broadcast orders, and only units that are in range of the command unit's Vox caster will receive the buffs from these abilities, which do things like boosting unit stats, their evasions, suppression resistance, accuracy, armor penetration, and movement speed. Next up, many of us were pleasantly surprised to see the return of Bodyguard units, which is awesome because quite a few players are tired of the huge focus on legendary lords and heroes playing such an overpowered role in the average battle for Warhammer 3. That's not to say there won't be Primarchs or incredibly powerful single-entity hero or lord-type units in Total War 40k. There's going to be, 10 years worth of DLC that's going to add crazy over-the-top shit to this game, but for now, it's at least an indication that your average leader or command units aren't all going to be super overpowered one-man armies. I'd be happy to see that paradigm move to become the exception instead of the rule for every faction and every army. Moving on to projectiles. Projectiles and their impacts in Total War 40k are a combination of calculations that are simulated first and then abstracted after the fact, meaning the engine now handles and simulates the sheer insane amount of projectiles being thrown around in your average battle, so if a bolter fires around and a tank moves between it and its intended target, the tank can block the projectile and protect the target behind it, effectively creating player-controlled dynamic cover, which is sick. The abstraction part of the calculation then comes into into play for the modifiers that handle stats like accuracy, being in cover versus out of cover, or how much armor penetration is required to successfully damage a unit. Worth noting as well is visually we see a lot of ricochets occurring throughout the gameplay footage, and this is purely visual to represent very little to no damage taking place. And ricocheted fire is not actually simulated and won't randomly hit an unlucky nearby guardsman in the face. Moving on to a pretty exciting feature, relevant units are now capable of strafing, and most, if not all units, have the capacity to fire whilst moving. Practically speaking, just about every unit in the game has now been jigged up so that they can pivot the shooty bits of their model to aim, while their movie bits play the run the hell away animation. Similarly, tanks and sentinels, as seen in the footage, are able to strafe, and while they don't explicitly state that units have varying degrees of armor per face on their models, they do mention that this will allow you to maneuver units to not expose your rear. To what degree your rear might be vulnerable to fire, or if certain units have particular vulnerabilities depending on their facing, remains to be specified, but there's opportunity here for even more player skill expression to outmaneuver, outflank and outplay your opponents, especially in multiplayer, of which I have high hopes for. Different units have varying degrees of competency while firing and moving, so a standard guardsman human dude guy will be far less effective while moving and firing than, say, a space marine, and their stats are modified accordingly for obvious things like reduction in accuracy or perhaps an increase to evasion and modifiers to suppression effects. Speaking of suppression, suppression is a new mechanic introduced to, quote, slow down the output, unquote, of a unit while under fire or applied as a potential side effect from various abilities. Due to the general increase in lethality that comes with the territory of the game having such a high focus on ranged combat, CA don't want battles to be over too fast, and this is a feature that kind of aims to assist with that. When under suppression, units will have a reduced rate of fire and physical reduction in their speed, providing opportunities to punish your opponent when caught out in the open and not utilizing cover. Expect this mechanic to be continually worked on and tweaked as the game heads into its closed beta, hopefully coming really soon. Alongside suppression mechanics, CA also assured us that flanking would remain as effective as ever in Total War 40k. Timing engagements to outposition the enemy, fire into their sides or rear should be what makes up the meat of what actions you can perform to win battles effectively, much like previous titles. Flanked and suppressed units are indicated at the moment with the orange highlight and arrow icon, bringing with it the statistical negatives of suppression and the morale hits for being flanked or shot in the air at the rear. Next up, we have cover. CA have stated often and loudly since Total War 40k's announcement that cover will play a huge role in your average engagement. We finally learned that mechanically speaking, cover will not only physically block projectiles, but will also provide evasion bonuses to units, and cover comes in many different formats. From occupying dedicated cover spots like the ruins on screen, to the units adapting to the terrain like the sandbank encampments we've seen sprinkled throughout this map, and large explosives from abilities or other units creating craters that can modify the terrain to provide further points of cover. Cover, such as the ruins on this map, can also be targeted, and the resulting collapse becomes a devastating source of damage to units caught within range. CA have gone a step further, however, and mentioned that there's a difference between intentional cover, like the ruins or sandbags, that provide the abstracted evasion bonus to unit stats, as well as physically blocking projectiles, while the more makeshift cover, dynamically created by explosions and forming craters, don't necessarily provide the evasion bonus, but does provide simulated or line of sight cover to protect entities in a unit. Obviously, to gauge how truly effective and impactful cover is in your average battle, we'll have to play it for ourselves to find out, but so far it's all sounding very cool, logical and awesome. Time and balance tweaking will eventually tell the full tale of how effective or meta utilizing cover becomes, and I cannot wait to find out. Now moving on to arguably the deepest and most game-changing feature coming to units in Total War 40k, customization. Not only have CA teased how deep the cosmetic customization of your army colors will be, it's Warhammer 40k after all, army painting is a huge part of the fun of the tabletop as a hobby, but unit loadouts can be customized as well. And not just the unit as a whole, but the individual entities of a unit can differ from one another and use different loadouts. For instance, a unit of Kazakin can be tailored by the player to be made up of standard Kazakin as well as specialists and sergeants. Some entities in a unit can have have multiple weapons and use them dynamically depending on what they're engaging, like crack grenades to deal with armor and frag grenades to deal with troops, or flamethrowers that are highly effective at dealing with units in cover but have a much lower range. In the example, the unit of 30 Kazakin are made up of 16 standard Kazakin, 2 Kazakin Voxcasters, 2 Kazakin Sergeants, and 10 Kazakin Specialists. Changing 2 entities to Voxcasters probably allows this unit to retain a radius around it to receive and apply the abilities from the before-mentioned Regimental Orders tabs. The detail here is becoming ridiculous to say the least. As we see in this single unit of 30 individual Kazakin, their loadout consists of hotshot lasguns, plasma guns, chainswords, bayonets, frag grenades, and las pistols, all in one unit. So essentially the army building of previous Total War games, where it was all about bringing the right units to counter and effectively deal with certain threats throughout your campaigns and battles, has evolved to consider much finer detail, to the point of tailoring individual entities with what weaponry they bring to the field. We'll be deciding to make units more adaptable to deal with various enemy types, vaguely categorized as light, medium, and heavy, or to become hyper-specialized to deal with specific targets. So you could make a unit of Kazakin that can deal with just about anything but be a master of none, or it could be customized to specialize in taking out enemy armor, but suck at dealing with just about everything else. So what remains to be seen is, because units are automatically switching weapons depending on the targets they're engaging, are we missing an opportunity for more micro decision making and skill from the player? Or will certain units have their own abilities on top of their customized loadouts for us to trigger alongside the army abilities and bombardments? Most of the feedback I've seen has players pretty happy with the decision so far and are content to have less control, and as the armchair generals of giant interstellar space armies shouldn't have to worry about the minutiae of telling a soldier when and how to use his frag grenade. Moving on to another new exciting enhancement. Units can fire at multiple targets at the same time. Gone will be the days that an entire unit won't fire because one guy at the end of the rank hasn't fully rotated to face the enemy yet, or cannot see the elf 10 feet in front of him, preventing the entire unit from taking any action at all. CA mentions how the front rows of a unit will now be more eager to fire, while the back rows are more hesitant, waiting until they get a clear line of sight to a target, and each individual entity has its own state detached from the rest of the unit. So expect units to reload, take aim, and fire all at their own pace instead of the shared pace of the entire unit. Speaking of firing, let's talk about ammo, because that shit is now infinite, which I think is a good choice. It's Warhammer after all, not Logistician Hammer. While I'm sure there could be interesting gameplay design opportunities for resupplying and rearming units in long battles, I think it's best for CA to just focus on the fun of the combat gameplay, and that seems to be what people want out of a 40k game. Although I cannot help but wonder what a particularly long, drawn-out battle could devolve into if ammo was indeed finite, and you eventually get forced into all kinds of ridiculous melee-only situations. But then, factions like the Imperial Guard probably would not fare very well, if at all. However, Total War 40k is obviously drawing tons of inspiration from the tabletop, and tracking ammunition is not a thing there, so to me it makes sense. I'm not going to cry about it, let's just get a good, solid and fun game to play. Instead of tracking ammo, CA have mentioned that individual entity states are tracked. So a guardsman, for example, who has been firing his weapon, every shot is tracked and will eventually require a reload. That state is retained if that entity is interrupted, so once he begins firing again, he might have a few more shots until the reload animation is then activated. What was interesting here is that Chatter asked during the livestream if a guardsman who needs to reload soon is idle for long enough, like 30 seconds or so, why wouldn't they just reload? The answer was, they will basically, but they are still fiddling with it, which is a weird answer, but who cares? Look at the cool Ogren turn that guy's face into pulp. Speaking of face pulp, when a unit with ranged weapons is engaged in melee, individual entities can and will continue to fire their weapons, and CA mentioned an example of units equipped with shotguns that would be particularly effective at close range. However, I find it funny that when they spoke about ranged units engaging in melee, as in the footage seen here, all these guardsmen at the bottom of the screen still rush up to get face pulped instead of firing at the Ogren. But hopefully that's just a balance thing or a poor example, or the full feature just isn't in this month's old build or something. Next up, they spoke about splash damage for a bit, and a chatter asked if splash damage from vehicles exploding will be a thing. To which the developer answered yes, but I don't know if they quite understood the nuance of the question. What I think the chatter meant was, will units that explode act as a source of damage to other units? Like if a vehicle explodes because it reached 0 hit points, does that explosion act as a source of splash damage? However, interestingly enough, this segued to them discussing a new feature, the ability for systemic or chaotic deaths, which means there's a chance for vehicles or entities to veer off course upon death. They don't specify if this is purely aesthetic or if vehicles exploding and reaching 0 hit points have a chance to run over and damage friendly or enemy formations, which would all add to the general lethality and chaos of the average Total War 40k battle. Personally, I'm not against a bit of RNG causing severe disruptions to your front line and potentially swinging the tide of a battle because a tank exploded and plowed through a unit of guardsmen on one of your vulnerable flanks. I find that could be interesting and might add some unique flavor to the game, but we'll have to experience it for ourselves and, determine the frequency by which these things tend to happen, and they said they'd love to dive deeper into this feature in an upcoming video or stream. Next up, we have probably one of the coolest mechanics to be shown off so far, and that's sweeping fire. They demonstrated with this Baneblade unleashing an insane amount of firepower onto a unit of Orc Boys, each weapon tracking individual areas and sweeping through the ranks, attempting to hit as many targets as possible, which is just plain sick. I don't know about you guys, but I immediately thought of this example getting scaled up as we get to more and more exciting units and DLCs added to the game at later dates. So you could imagine this sweeping attack mechanic being used by Imperial Knights or Titans and all the other giant mechanical monstrosities of 40k, just absolutely decimating the battlefield. So right now I feel like the future is less grimdark and more exciting than ever. And lastly, we have Sentry Mode. This is an interesting one, and it basically lets you target a unit with another unit, and that unit will prioritize that target throughout the entire battle. It's not an attack command, so it won't send the unit after your target of choice, but throughout the battle, whenever your sentried unit is in range of its prioritized target, they will stop attacking whatever they're attacking and focus on their target. I don't think I've ever seen a mechanic like this in any other RTS or tactical strategy game, but it's an interesting idea, and I can't wait to see how useful or pointless it becomes. Because I imagine if a unit that I needed to fight another particular unit, I would just click on it and tell it to do the thing, right? Is that just me? I don't know. So those are all the new impressive exciting features coming to Total War 40k that we know of so far. And now we'll move on to my general impressions and other bits and pieces worth talking about. First off, we need to address the giant UI elephant in the room. When the stream started, I could not get over just how much of the screen was being overtaken by the UI. That's well over 30% of the screen, probably more, that's just UI. Sure, some of the elements aren't always shown, and hopefully Total War 40k keeps to tradition and gives us full control over the scale of the UI, but honestly my first impression was, is that a UI for console peasants? What the hell is going on here? No one wants giant mobile game ass looking UI in their Total War games, but hopefully this will become a non-issue. They then mentioned that this battle is taking place on a sparse map, and I'm not sure, this map didn't feel very sparse to me. I do hope we get even more sparse maps than this because I like big, open, desolate maps that resemble my soul. I'm hopeful that we'll probably in the future see far less urban maps that aren't always in or near hive cities. It's 40k after all, and I'd like to see a ton of variety. Speaking of the map, this battle took place in the west versus east orientation as opposed to the standard north versus south. This is an attempt by CA to provide a bit of what I'm calling fake variety to maps, since all the maps are handcrafted and not procedural, which is its own concern in a way, and I've spoken about this at length in a previous video, so if you're interested in that kind of thing, check it out in the description. However, I guess anything that CA are doing to combat map fatigue is a welcome change, and it's kind of nice. Another point I feel worth talking about is the lighting. This demonstration tended to look incredibly flat at most angles, and when the main light source is in view, we get incredibly harsh silhouettes, and I feel it really muddies out all the details. I definitely think that CA have struggled with lighting in the maps of Total War 1, 2, and 3, and even today you can load a random map in Warhammer 3 and get some absolutely abysmally lit maps that look like something out of the Quake 2 engine. I can't even play Warhammer 3 without the Ultimate Lighting mod, so hopefully they can tone it down a bit or fix the lighting as the game gets closer to release. But again, that's me nitpicking, and I'm sure a mod will fix it anyway. And finally, the last thing I think worth mentioning, they said that the AI on this map was basically just given one big attack move order and shouldn't be representative of what we can expect in the final release. However, this is Creative Assembly we're talking about. The sheer meminess of these guys talking about AI is beyond a joke at this point. Just look at the state of Total War Warhammer 3 after all these years. Sieges are still atrocious and the AI basically begs to be cheesed in most if not all battles. It's 2026, there are great grandmothers out there using AI to floss their dentures, and there are models being trained to take on SC2 Pros, which arguably has more mechanical nuance than something like Total War. So I'm not sure what excuses CA will pull out of their asses if the AI in Total War 40k sucks just as bad as previous titles. If the AI does fail to impress, it will kill many players' motivations to play through campaigns, and there's no more spaghetti code excuses for CA to fall back on. This is their new, updated, enhanced, mega modern iteration of Warcore, so hopefully it doesn't suck. As for my overall impressions, the game's ultimately looking awesome. I'm loving the pace of the engagements, especially what we saw in those clips. It's almost as if Total War Warhammer 40k is shaping up to be a harmonious blend of the expected Total War experience, but merged with a more standard RTS type feel, most likely due to the general heavy ranged focus of units in the game. I'm not sure if that's ultimately going to be a good thing or a bad thing for this particular Total War title, but it's the responsiveness of the units and the speed of combat and the time to engage. All of these things feel a bit more snappy and cohesive based on what we've seen so far. Like the Baneblade unit engaging those orcs while out of cover. They get absolutely decimated in no time at all, which to me at least looked and felt right. The tank feels powerful, the time to kill felt right, simply based on what we saw. So I'm extrapolating that feeling towards what the rest of the game potentially has to offer, and I'm currently convinced that it's going to be a hell of a lot of fun. So I can't wait. Let me know what you guys think. Tell me your thoughts and feelings in the comments below. I'm eager to discuss what we've seen here. Let me know if I did a good job on this video, or if it sucked and you want to Ogren face pulp me through your monitor. Thanks so much for watching. Like if you enjoyed, subscribe if you want more, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.